go.
Okay.
All right. All signed up. Hi, Six. Hi, Charlie. Polly Free Love and Nick, welcome on Instagram. So what I was starting to say is that we're talking about fighting with friends and family. And fighting can be a tough topic to want to talk about, right? Because talking about fighting can make people want to fight. But families fight for different reasons, like opinions or beliefs, misunderstandings, or not having the full story, which are things that everybody ends up fighting over for the most part. A lot of fights are really born out of misunderstandings, not having full stories, rushing to judgment, being influenced by the past and not really seeing things in the present. You know, if somebody has always done something in your mind, always done something a certain kind of way, and then you come up to another instance of something, rather than get the whole story and see what's going on with the other person, we're quick to judge them based on the filter that we see them through from our experience in the past. Sometimes that's justified, but sometimes it's better to stay in the present and ask a few more questions before we run off and end up in fights. Hey, Mary. So some of the triggers or topics that lead to family conflict can be stress, mental health challenges, differences in political and religious views. I'm sure most of us have families that divide along political and religious lines. Family issues, finances, substance use, caregiving, especially when a parent gets older and there's siblings and not everybody has the same idea about what it looks like to step in and care for an aging or ill parent. Adopted or new family members, right? I know that there can be challenges when a family decides to adopt a child. Maybe there already are children and it's a new child, or there's an adopted child and then a biological child comes into the family. Those can all be issues for challenge. Hormonal changes, those can be any number of things. The one that most commonly comes to mind is when mom starts to, becomes perimenopausal, and she goes from being the sweetest thing in the world to being like a hot raging mess all the way through menopause. But I think there are other hormonal changes that happen for people too, sometimes around illnesses and medications, right? When men have issues with prostate and they have to take hormones for that, or even when people get sick and they have to take steroids for illnesses and stuff. Steroids can really do a number on people's emotions and how people, what you bring to your everyday interactions, like the word that just escaped me, the one that we take for those things. Moving can be stressful for people. Travel, sometimes families plan to travel and it sounds like a great idea until everyone has a different idea about where you should go and how you should go and where you should stay, and then next thing you know, you're into fighting. Also, I think what happens on travel is you end up with time on your hands that you don't have normally, right? So in your normal life, you're working, you're taking care of kids, you're going to so you don't have time to think about those things and time to fight necessarily. But go away on holiday somewhere with family, and all of a sudden, like, the little things that bother you have room because you don't have anything to focus on, so you end up fighting on vacation when it's not really what you intended to do. And then just divorce and relationship issues in general. So those are all some suggestions of ways to understand or things to look at when we're talking about fighting with families. Then there's different family member fights, right? Like, so when you're 18, 19, 20 and you're fighting with your siblings, that looks different than when parents fight with each other or when teenagers fight with their parents, right? So those are all different lines across which family fighting happens. That was a lot. So if any of you have experiences with fighting, if you can recall a last time that you fought and what it was about and what triggered it, by all means put it in the chat. I can think of a few fights that I've had. I moved to New York 14 years ago because I had an opportunity to change my life around and engage the lifestyle 24/7. I was really excited about it. My sister and I were super, super close and had been for years. And I don't think I ever told her. You know, the partner I had in California, he and I were in the lifestyle, not very well suited, but
Swinger lifestyle.
Swinger lifestyle, but also BDSM. Absolutely, we went to parties. We did BDSM play, so that was part of our life as well.
BDSM events.
At BDSM
or
events.
Swing events.
No, at BDSM events, not at swing events. We didn't even go to swing clubs. The swinging we did was individually. We played with people in private homes where we did that kind of swapping, but our public play was all at BDSM parties. Part of what made that challenging, as a total rabbit hole aside, is I knew I wanted to be submissive, and he tried to take on the role of dominant, and our play was always very unsatisfactory. And I think in hindsight, it's because he was dominant, he was submissive, and didn't know how to say it or know how to acknowledge it, and so we would get in, and we didn't know what we were doing. It's not like we had some toys, we had spanking toys and flog, and we didn't know how to use them, and we would go, we were very new at BDSM, and so, but that was part of my life. But it didn't occur to me that I had never talked to my sister about it or talked to my family about it. And so then I was so excited. I moved here. It was crazy, the story how I moved to New York, but I was in my car and I drove 2 days to get from California to New York. I just basically drove nonstop, 5-hour energies, talking to people on Bluetooth. And so I got my sister on the phone and I told her how excited I was and what I was doing. And she, unexpectedly to me, got super upset. I didn't know she knew anything about any of it. She basically said, I have no room for this. I don't believe in what you're doing. And I gotta go. I have other things to do. I have no space for this. And it essentially, like, that's the rift in our relationship that in some ways still exists. So that's what it was about. And I think what I found out a few years later, that what actually triggered it is my sister had some experience with a friend who had been talked into swinging by her boyfriend, when really it was just a ruse for him to be able to have extra sex, and her friend was very hurt by it. That was my sister's only exposure to the idea of the lifestyle. So she was convinced that that's what was going to happen to me, and that I was being naive, or that I had been talked into something. And then she never was open again to having another conversation about it. So that's what triggered it, and that's what happened. I also learned from that to be very careful about letting people know about my involvement in the lifestyle, because that's a cat you can't get back in the bag once it's out. And I didn't know that, because I was kind of new to the idea of being in the lifestyle 24/7 and so excited about it. And I think I just trusted that the closeness of our relationship would have carried the day, and it didn't. So that's one example that I have. And so a current ongoing fight with my mom about not visiting. It's not that I don't want to see her. Yeah, I think that's a big deal when you don't live close to your family, and whoever in the family feels like somebody should visit more often, and then there's guilt tripping, and I'm familiar with that. Let's see. I'm trying to think what other fights that I've had. I try not to have fights, really. I try to see everything from the lens of, it was a miscommunication, it was a misunderstanding, and how can we navigate that better, or more specifically. So I got a thing here about the difference between destructive and constructive conflicts, right? And that changes how family members approach arguments. It has a lot to do with how the conflict gets resolved. How do the people involved feel after everything is said and done and a solution is identified? If they feel seen, heard, understood, and respected, then the argument was a constructive conflict. If they leave with a solution but feel put down, belittled, or misunderstood, it was a destructive conflict that could lead to prolonged arguing, resentments, creating a gap in relationships and significant family problems. And that's an important distinction, right? Like, I think sometimes One of the things I was talking to a friend of mine about this today is it was told to me years ago that you can't be right and happy. When one person in an argument is so caught up in wanting to be right, then the ability to listen tends to be diminished, right? And so sometimes when I find myself doing that, I can catch myself and try to let go of whatever it is that's making me want to be right about this argument, because I may be trying to be right at the expense of the person that I'm arguing with. So maybe I can be a little bit more open-minded, I can take myself down a notch, and I can be willing to see the other person's viewpoint. Because when I'm busy trying to convince you that I'm right, I'm not really listening to what you're saying, and I'm not hearing it, and I'm not being in an open-minded enough space to take it in. So that's an important thing. And so even if there's a resolution, sometimes a resolution can be one that everyone feels good about, and then you walk away and you feel like it was a constructive conversation. But if a solution is sort of hammered out and one person has the opportunity to feel good about it, but the other person or people in that particular case don't feel good about it, then it was more destructive than anything, and we walk away while we all somehow vaguely believe that there was a solution that was come up with. We don't really feel that way. So let's see. Lay says, arguments amongst my family usually occur when I place boundaries in how I'm spoken to, right? Pup and I will bicker because north versus south terminology causes misunderstandings. Absolutely. How often do we fight? I've had this happen in my life where I've ended up in a fight when really the problem was having two different understandings of the same word. The relationship that I had for 15 years in California, we fought cyclically, and I can't remember the word, but we would fight cyclically about this one thing. And then one day I heard him say something in a certain kind of way that made me realize that maybe we weren't defining this thing the same way. So when we backed it all the way up and I said, what do you mean when you say this word? I was like, that's not what that word means. At least it wasn't what that word meant to me, right? And so the same thing was true. So we were able to unravel a long string of argument over coming to understanding that we were not using the same definition. So I call that the difference between the denotative definition of a word, like what's in the dictionary, like we've been doing here for the last 3 weeks, like looking up words in the dictionary to like define them, to be clearer. And then what's the connotative, right? Like depending on your culture, how you were raised, certain words take on a color or a flavor that are not necessarily part of the actual definition, but influence how you feel like when someone brings it up. That unless you're aware of it, you don't realize that that's what you're fighting about. You're fighting over some sense of the definition of a word that you didn't know you were disagreeing about. My mom constantly reminds me I'll never be a man, but then tells me, oop, that's scrolled up too fast. Right, people choose to argue and simply want it to be right. Exactly. Fatally yours, I appreciate that, not trying to argue with people much, right? This wasn't about right or wrong for me, but just a perspective. Then I was accused of being angry. I get that. Sometimes we're just coming at things from a different place. Sometimes the way to avoid a fight is just simply to say, we're not getting anywhere with this right now. How about we come back to this later? That's a good strategy to at least minimize damage. The damage can come from the destructive conflicts, right? If we're caught up in a cycle with a friend or a family member, and we're going around in circles and it's just feeling hurtful, sometimes the best thing to do is just not to dismiss either one's viewpoint, but to say maybe we should come back at this later when we are not feeling so hot and bothered about it. I don't like when people tell me how I feel or what I meant by something. That is a common argument, absolutely. Quickest way to make somebody feel not seen and not heard is to tell them how you think they're feeling, or to tell them what you think they should think, right? Passionate and compassionately fighting can be seen as anger too. And, that's this thing about feelings. There's nothing wrong with being angry. right? Angry is just a feeling, just like sad is a feeling, and just like all the different feelings. It's what you do, especially what you're doing when you're having a disagreement. If you get angry, do you make sort of rules for yourselves around how are you going to handle it when one or the other of you gets angry in a disagreement, or a disagreement that becomes a fight, right? Is the fight over something that's real, or is it a disagreement that gets conflagrated because of how we feel? That's not easy stuff to sort out a lot of the time. Let's see what else is here. So what I also got is places where we're impacted by, like, places in our lives where we're impacted, right? So unfortunately, like mental health issues can be impacted, right? Like people who fight a lot, family fighting can be caused by or can cause anxiety, depression, self-harm, wanting to unlive yourself, or even eating disorders. Like those things can, and substance abuse, we were saying that earlier, some of these things, the like finances, substance abuse, family issues, etc., can cause fighting, but can also be impacted by the fighting. And so sometimes it becomes a vicious circle, right? Like substance abuse runs in my family, and there's some people in the family who can see it, and there's some people in the family like me who have chosen to do something about it, and then there's people in my family who refuse to see it, and there's people who refuse to do anything about it. I have stepped out of that biological part of my family for the most part, because it's hard to be someone who's become aware and has made a choice to do something about it, and to be around family members who don't want to or can't see it. It's just hard. So, sort of like that's a solar system thing, right? Like I used to be very close to my biological family. I grew up with my family. We got together every weekend with extended aunts, uncles, cousins. Every holiday we did together. Lots and lots of closeness, even though those issues were present. But as I got older, and then as I made these changes in my life, and hey, emotional support brat, nice to see you. I became less able to be around my family. It was harder to be around my family holidays because there's so much drinking, and then it was hard to be around the family because then that stuff could lead to fighting. And I wasn't in it anymore. So I just created more and more space. Not really my heart. I don't love them any less. It's just hard to want to be around them. And so I just have chosen not to. I have chosen family now, which is really cool. And we fight. Like, fighting happens. I don't know there's any relationships that don't fight. And I think there is something to be said about constructive versus destructive fighting, or conscientiously creating an environment where you can manage disagreements, where you can make room for misunderstandings and hearing what the other one, because a lot of times one of the things I know I'm guilty of is trying to express myself, and then I use words that are not as accurate to explain what I'm trying to explain. They're the best words that I can come up with in the moment, but then when they're like sort of reflected back to me with the feelings that those words brought about for the other person, I can see that how they're taking it wasn't really, I didn't mean for them to feel that kind of way, and that wasn't the impact I was meaning to have. And then I find out that was because I wasn't able to find the words to say what I really wanted to say. So it was like a misspeaking. It was misunderstanding born from my misspeaking how I was really thinking or feeling. And so in the wake of that, I've tried really hard to get clearer about my use of language, and to be as specific as I can about what I really mean, and to put things in a way that I always try to keep another way to avoid conflict is to keep the focus on yourself. When I can speak from how I feel, how I'm feeling affected, what's going on for me, and I can stay out of trying to tell you what's wrong with you, what you're not doing right, what I think you need to do different, it can create a kinder environment to sort of disagree in rather than to fight. So relationship issues, teens can experience family relationship issues if they don't feel seen or heard by siblings or parents. They can grow distant from one another. They may have difficulty trusting others, making it difficult to have healthy romantic relationships. That's for sure. Teenagers, kids learn how to have romantic relationships from their parents. There's a ton of studies on that. So the better your relationship is with your parents, the better models that they are for how they run their relationships, but also the way that they have relationships with their kids will definitely impact the relationships they're able to have later when they grow up. Like, that's the science on that is an overwhelming thing. Family conflict can lead to behavior issues, such as teens expressing physical or verbal aggression or becoming withdrawn. And that's where you start to see the trauma responses, right? That's where teenagers start to do fight or flight, freeze or fawn. Some kids, if they're headed in the freeze direction, they'll retreat to their bedrooms, retreat to their video games, books, not speaking, not wanting to connect with friends, not wanting to come out of their room for family things. And that's the beginning of a freeze response, right? They just can't deal with anything, and so they don't. My flight and fawn responses started with me caretaking for my family. That was how I dealt with my trauma, was to step up my caretaking game even as a teenager. So I think it's possible to see how a lack of, like, the more challenged your fighting skills are, the greater the likelihood for trauma responses to come out. And I think that we can see evidence of that in kids. I spent so much of my teenage years in fight or flight, I don't remember much of my childhood because I was in survival mode. Absolutely, that happens to a lot of us. I had the same thing. And mine was all like over little traumas. I didn't have like overly abusive parents, but I was bullied all the time and I had no support at home. And with my mom passing and stuff like that, I ended up in survival mode from a young age, and I covered it over because I was really good at taking care of people. So it looked like it was, it was like a good thing, what I wanted to do, but it was just what happened. So substance abuse, exactly, can, a stressful home environment can lead to substance abuse. And there's a lot of arguments about that, right? If alcoholism runs in families, I look at it as the disease model works for me. I think drug addiction can be varied. Like, I think some people can go for periods of time where being addicted to drugs circumstantially, and then they can have opportunity in their lives to be able to walk away from that. And like, they don't have this like alcoholism like I have it. And so abusing drugs can be a temporary, not productive response to family fighting that can then be worked out, I think, later in life. These are all just my rambling thoughts and feelings today. Continuous family conflict can cause teens and young adults to have a negative outlook on life in general, because families should be safe spaces, right? And should is really a tough word. Sometimes your family of origin just isn't a safe space. And unfortunately, you come out, like, what do we say? Nobody escapes childhood unharmed, right? So if you can't openly express yourself, or you can't be in a conflict without expecting backlash or judgment, kids start to expect that interactions with other people are going to be the same way. I think for me, the biggest piece of how to navigate through this is to just really make as much space as you can. If you care about the person that you're in the fight with, just try to make as much space as you can inside yourself to hear what they have to say. I've actually done that a lot, and with some success, right? I've had people in my life who just needed to be heard. And they came from an environment where they didn't get to be heard. And so when a fight would happen and things would escalate, I would try to be rational or try to, interject other viewpoints when really that wasn't what was needed. What was really needed was for me to just listen, for me to just put my thoughts and feelings aside and give the person the space to speak until they got everything out that they needed to say, because that was not what they were afforded when they were younger, right? So sometimes just becoming aware of what the other person in our family or our friends need can be a way to start to take down like negative habits of fighting, right? Because I think the opposite of that is we get into habits with the people we care about, where we fight more regularly because we don't take the time to figure out what it's about or what we could do to make it different. So then that's family stuff, right? So then friends stuff, friends argue for a variety of reasons as well. Conflicts over needs, values, desires, or just about anything else. In any close relationships, conflicts are normal. And when conflicts touch feelings such as fear, love, guilt, disappointment, anger, whatever, they can easily explode into shouting and blaming, right? Shouting and blaming should give you the first clue that you're on ground that you could want to try to dial back from. But it's hard to sometimes when you're really in it. The fight may then lead to a breakup in the friendship, or at least a temporary alienation between you and your friend. What do? First of all, is the friendship worth saving? If you say no, then lay aside your hurt or angry feelings and invest energy in your other friends. I mean, sometimes if I fight with someone continuously, or the things we're about to talk about happen all the time, maybe the message from the universe is that this is just someone that I need to let go of. I need to make room in my life for other people. But if you say yes, then consider this possibility. When your feelings have cooled a bit, say to your friend something like, "Our friendship is very important to me, and I hope it is to you also. I'd like to talk about what is keeping us apart." And then wait for your friend's response. Your friend may stay quiet or continue to look hurt or angry. Whatever their reaction or response, the important thing is that you took the initiative to reestablish contact. If your friend isn't ready to discuss the matter, you might say, "Well, I'll call you in a couple of days. I hope we can talk then." Right? So once one of you can find your way back to some sort of calm and rational ground, I think trying to hold that space for the other person, if it's a relationship you want to keep, till they can do the same thing, is a really helpful way to try to navigate hardships, right? Let's see. I left as soon as I could. I worked outside the house as soon as I was allowed by law, right? So it sounds like we're still talking about family stuff here. So what are some things friends fight about? What if you dislike your best friend's significant other? How many people have had that happen, where you have somebody you're really close to, and then they hook up with somebody and you're like, "Oh my God, what do you possibly see in that person?" I know I've had that happen. Unfortunately, you may dislike your BFF's significant other at some point, and your bestie may dislike yours. But half of this feeling might stem from the fear of spending less time with your friend, making an effort to hang out one-on-one without boyfriends or girlfriends, and focus on talking about other things in life, as opposed to, just talking about your significant others. But reminder, you love this person, so will anyone really seem good enough? So there's a couple of sides to that, right? Like if you're one of my best friends, then my sense is, whoever's with you should be worthy of you. And when you hook up with someone and I see you settling for less, I see you not being treated the way I think you deserve to be treated, then I'm going to have an issue with that. And then again, how do I navigate that, right? Because it's your life to live. It's your decisions to make. So that becomes, I've had that challenge before. I've had that challenge with feeling like being caught between saying something, what to say, knowing that I'm running the risk of losing the relationship because the other person is so into the significant other that they don't want to hear it. They're not ready to hear anything about it. So they just feel like you're trying to rain on their parade. So that can be a really challenging situation. Things get competitive. You're bound to get a little competitive every now and then, whether comparing outfits or job prospects, or I think in some cases sports. and politics, right? And just remember, while it might seem like fun and games, jealousy can truly mess up lifelong friendships. If you're feeling a little green, come clean and think to yourself, what exactly am I jealous of and why, right? If you and your friends are in the same sports and one of them's a little bit better than you at it, you can be jealous that they have more skill than you do, or more, but maybe they put in more time than you have. Like, if you can roll it back and see what it is that's making you want to have bad feelings towards your friend about something you're being like, why does the competition go from being friendly and sports like to being disruptive and destructive? Did you ever have stuff like that around sports?
Monopoly.
Yes, and I've been present for some of those challenging Monopoly games. Dates get in the way. So you like the same person. So what? People can be attracted to each other. Just go back to number 2 and remind yourself that it isn't competitive. One person isn't better simply because someone else is attracted to him or her. Plus, crushes are instant bonding moments, but might be better to fawn over unattainable celebs. I can't say I'm exactly clear what that means, except to say,
Jealousy of friends.
Jealousy of friends, like if you're attracted to the same person that another person is attracted to, yeah.
Or if you have the quote unquote pretty friend.
Oh, I get that. So your friend has a friend that you're jealous of. Yeah, this sounds like it's exactly about jealousy. So I don't know if any of you have had any of these situations in your friendships. So I know I have. I'm just trying to think of specific examples. Wait, that's my sweater. BFFs share clothes, but if you're finding that yours is stealing one too many, Brandy Melville, I'll admit I don't know who that is, shirts without returning them, it might be time to start asking for them back. A simple, hey, have you seen my Zara crop top, could suffice as a reminder that you know what you're missing. But if lying is happening, that's a whole other story. It might be time to confront someone about his or her sticky fingers. And a lot of these seem lent towards more female relationships in terms of the things people argue about. But I can see this kind of argument across a bunch of stuff. I know my dad and all the men in my family were in construction, and owning power tools is a big deal. Power tools are expensive, and the more of them and the more advanced ones you have, the more work you can do. And so if someone would have one that you don't have, to ask to borrow it, but when do you give it back? When is it appropriate to have to ask for it back? And when does the back and forth about those things create bad feelings? I'm just trying to read the naughty. Is there any other way to cook? I'm not following the thread because you guys are chatting with each other, which is awesome. So someone gets left out of the friend group. The 3-way call-in mean girls is no longer a thing. This 3-way thing goes all the way back to me. It's like an elementary school thing. And when people do it as adults, I'm always baffled by it, because I feel like, for me, it was really painful when I was a kid, right? There'd be 3 friends, 2 of them would buddy up this week, and 1 would be left out. And then the next week, the other 2, we were all taking turns, like, being best buddies and being left out. And the week you were left out, you felt really bad. And there was a part of me that became aware of it, even at that age, that was like, this is crazy, but I had no idea how to stop it. Chanting Prague, I understand what you mean about that. The times where I was, feeling always left out, there were places and circumstances in which I was always left out as a kid, absolutely. And I think that's why it made it so much more painful when I would finally get in good graces with 1 or 2 girls. And in my mind, I'm like, why can't we just all be friends? And then this thing would keep coming up about the 2 of them going off and leaving me alone. And then a couple weeks later, I'd be lucky enough to be back in with one of them. But then I'd feel bad that the other one was left out. It was a craziness to me, even while I was going through it at that age. But then when I see adults do it, I feel like did you not work that out in elementary? Like, did you not figure out how to do that and walk away from that? But it's a thing. People in friendships, when it's not just a one-on-one friendship, let's see, it's all about group texts and getting left off of one that could leave you feeling clueless about inside jokes and plans. Be proactive and start a new group text, but with a fun name. If you feel like you're missing out, then the only silly thing left to argue about is the name of the group, obviously. The more challenging flip side to that, and something that I've had to work through, is in the circles that I travel in, and this has to do with poly for me more than anything, is understanding that in poly in particularly, we're not all friends. And it's not that we aren't friendly, but all the relationships aren't the same. And so I've had to deal with my leftover trauma about all this being left out stuff that I did have as a kid, right? And so to come into poly, ethical non-monogamy is something that I have believed in and practiced for a long time. That game ramped up for me a few years ago, particularly when our relationship started, and I started to really live it in a way that was commensurate with what I believed. I then still had to confront all of I didn't know the word FOMO until a few years ago. I didn't know what that was. And so some of my way out of feeling bad was starting to recognize what that was in myself, and understanding that rightfully so, like, I'm not invited to everything. Even some things I may want to be part of, I'm not part of, and that's okay. It's okay to feel bad. It's okay to get over it. It's okay to not make other people wrong for making plans without you. And that's been a journey for me. I'm grateful to say that it's been a lot of hard work, and I've gotten to what I feel like is the other side about it. For the most part, I'm able to handle the feelings when they come up. I'm also able to ask clarifying questions if I'm not sure. Like, sometimes people talk about plans in front of me, and I can't tell if I'm being included in the conversation or not. So rather than get up all in my head about it, I've learned some ways to just ask clarifying questions. Try not to get, if I'm not in my feelings about it, if I'm asking a clarifying question, then the other people don't have to feel bad if they need to say to me, no, this doesn't include you. I can be like, cool, I'm just checking, right? So navigating that dynamic, that whole thing about, being left out, takes on a whole different realm for me in poly, in my experience with ethical non-monogamy. So if you're not tapping, you're napping. Thank you, Lays. I'm tapping, but I don't see it. That's so funny. Yes, the heart. We love the hearts. Thank you for the hearts. So when one flakes out on the other too much, that's an issue, right? So friendship is a two-way street, which means the burden of reaching out is or should be shared by all the people involved. So what happens if one person keeps canceling at the last minute? Might be time for a talk. Begin by saying how this makes you feel, and that is there a better way to plan things for them, right? Again, like, keep the focus on myself, right? If I'm feeling bad because my friend keeps flaking on me and I want to talk to them about it, one of the things I learned a long time ago is that actually you can't change people. So really the only thing I can do is show up and tell you how I feel, right? I can show up and tell you, hey, look, we've made these plans. You haven't been available. I don't like the way it makes me feel. Can we change the way we make plans? Is there something we can do different to make it easier for you to want to show up? Or if having done that, the person's still doing the same thing, that's another one of those examples of a time when maybe I need to think about letting a person go. One of the tools that I picked up over the years is to monitor myself so that I don't put more into a relationship than the other person does. And I've had to do that recently with people, right? Like I was in a new group of people and I was really excited and I wanted to make connections, and it was a Zoom group, but there were people who lived in the area, and I thought, wow, let's get together. And I was met with a lot of words that said that person agreed, but then behaviorally, the last time that it happened, they made a plan with me, and then I went to check it the next day, the day before, only to find out, oh no, I can't do that, blah, 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 I have something, and they never called me and told me about it. So had I not called them, I would have gone into the day in question not knowing that I was about to be no called, no showed. At that moment, I made the decision to not initiate again until the other person did. And that was 2 years ago. And that person's not anybody that I put energy into trying to have a connection with anymore, because I wasn't getting anything back. And sometimes it's okay to just do that. It's okay to see if I can't match energy, and if I'm not getting anything back, like that tells me everything I need to know about what the other person's got going on. And in some ways, no harm, no foul, because the harder I push, the more frustrated I get, and ultimately the more resentful I get. When in fact, if I focus on behavior, I'll get all the information I need, right? So, that's a tool that I've been able to use with people. So, like, maybe the person is dealing with something that they can't talk about, so you give them space and say that you'll still be there, right? But again, for me, that's that thing about, like, I'll give you so much space that if I don't ever hear from you again, then that tells me everything I need to know. Then another issue is truth-telling. Truth-telling, right? When do we tell our friends the hard truth about something, and when would telling them something just be kind of hurtful? And it can happen over little things. It can happen over things like, maybe I don't like the way what you're wearing looks on you, right? Is it my job to have to tell you, oh, that thing looks terrible on you, and it might make you feel bad? And this can be like a hard line for people, because people have different thoughts about it. But I think one of the tools that I've picked up around that is to ask myself, is there any reason for what I'm about to say? If there's any outcome that could come from what I'm about to say that would be anything other than just making the person feel bad, then I decide not to say it, right? If my saying something is about something that's happened in the past and there's nothing that they could do to go back and fix it, then all I'm doing is giving them an opportunity to feel bad. Like, I don't need to say it. If there's something to be learned from it, or there's something coming up, there's a way to say it. But if all I can come up with is there's nothing they could do about it, it would just make them feel bad, then I just need to not. If I care about the person, I care about how they feel. If it can't be fixed in less than a minute, no, then leave it be. I like that. That's another good frame of reference to use. For me, it's important to be truthful. Tough conversations require extra grace. Absolutely. I appreciate that. But again, I think in some ways you have to pick your battles. Like, even if you care about me, if all you're doing is coming at me with things about me that you think I need to change, or that I'm not doing right, or I need to do different, I will burn out on our friendship, because I will feel like really all you're doing is judging me, and I'm not good enough for you, and I don't measure up to all the things you think that I need to measure up to. And then I wonder, like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? However, if there's something I really need to see, and there's somebody in my life who's willing to show up and tell me a hard truth. And a hard truth for me is nothing more than something I need to see that I'm not necessarily willing or wanting to hear right now. That's all a hard conversation is for me. Like, I'm not as open to it as I need to be, but I need to hear it anyway. And the friends that can show up and do that with kindness and grace are the relationships that I cherish most in my life. The people who are willing to sit with me and say, hey, this thing, I think you need to look at it. And then sit with me while I don't want to, and then give me the space to come to the awareness that they were absolutely right. So that's not always easy to do. But I think some of those things are the things that help me determine who my real friends are, right? My real friends are the people who will show up and tell me the hard stuff and still love me and not leave me and be there for me. Even though they're telling me the hard things. And sometimes there's no easy way to do it. Sometimes hard conversations are just hard to have. They're not easy to navigate. But I think as long as both parties stay open to walking through it together, And even if it gets challenging, that thing I was saying earlier about being willing to come back, being willing to take space when things get heated and challenging, like beyond the ability to like deal with it, or when either party is in danger of saying things they don't mean. Because I think that can happen too. Like in the heat of the moment, sometimes we say things we don't really mean, and you can't take that stuff back. So I try to watch that too. I try to watch myself when I have that feeling inside, like I really want to say something, because I'm feeling hurt, because I'm feeling cornered, or because I'm feeling something other than kind and loving. I try not to. And that gets to my other criteria about when I can open my mouth. And there's a 6-part criteria. I don't know if I've ever said it on this call. I'll go slow enough. Maybe somebody can put it in the chat so you can capture it. But there's 6 things that I was taught how to do before I decide whether I speak. Is it truthful? Is it necessary? And is it kind? Then, if I can get through those 3 things, then I determine, yes, it's the truth, yes, it's necessary, and it can be said kindly. There's a kind way to say it. Then the other 3 pieces is, does it need to be said? Does it need to be said right now? And does it need to be said by me? There's a lot of stuff that doesn't make it through that criteria. And then I decide not to speak. Whatever it is I think I need to say, when I can put it through those 6 items, I can usually find the sticking point. A lot of times, all of the things are true, but it doesn't need to be said right now. And the not said right now comes from putting my own thoughts and feelings aside to be willing to see where the other person is right now. Maybe no matter how filled up I am about believing this needs to be talked about, they're on their way out to work. Maybe they're having a bad day around other things that have nothing to do with me. So there may be things going on, if I can be mindful of what's happening for the other person, that will let me check off that box that says it doesn't need to be said right now, right? And so there are circumstances around all 6 of those things that can govern not speaking about something. Sometimes I'm not the right person to say it, right? Sometimes there's something that absolutely I think needs to be said, and now wouldn't be a bad time, but I'm not the right person to deliver. I'm either too close to the person, I'm either part of the problem involved with it, and so upon reflection, I'm not the right person to have that conversation. Sometimes it just doesn't need to be said. Sometimes it might be necessary, truthful, and kind, but it just doesn't need to be said. So navigating all of those are good sort of preventative measures. They're ways of keeping arguments from happening or at least escalating. Let's see. I feel safer with someone, I want it to come from them, right? If I feel safer from someone, right? Like it is easier to hear something from someone you feel safe with, especially if it's challenging to want to hear. That thought process is exactly why I pause to think before responding or having a conversation. Absolutely, Persephone, that's exactly what we're talking about. For me, pausing, just the concept of pausing is not sometimes enough to stop me from saying something I ought not to say. So having these 6 things built in to give me to think about helps me when I want to just push right past pause, because that'll happen for me. Let's see. Recognizing it just may not be the right time, right? Just like time and space come from both ends, you might be, but I might not be, right? In terms of the right time to talk about something. Sometimes it takes a long time to have those conversations because you don't want to hurt them, right? And sometimes there's just pushing through that, right? I would rather have the hard truths come from my friends, my really good friends. Kushla, absolutely. Pausing is hard because then it will overwhelm me. Yeah, I can feel that. Something about this 6-point thing helps me to sort of navigate where I am on the subject, right? Whatever the thing is that I feel like I want to say. I can come back from feeling overwhelmed about it if I recognize that what's true and not true about the 6-point things. If I recognize that it is truthful, the thing I'm thinking, but it's not really necessary to say, Or it might be necessary, but I can't think of a kind way to say it. Like, it helps me dissect the impulse that I have to speak about something when I'm not 100% certain that it wouldn't make things worse instead of better. And then going through those 6 points in my head helps me to unravel it and not feel so overwhelmed by the whole thing. If I'm just struggling with, oh my God, I feel I have something I need to say and I shouldn't, and it's like, and I don't have a way to navigate my way through it, I can feel overwhelmed by it for sure. Let's see. Sometimes you also need to process through someone else before speaking up about something. Yes. They would call that processing, right? Sometimes if I'm having a difficulty with a person, and even if I think I have some idea of what I might want to say, there is great benefit for me to speaking to another person, and it is a tool I use a lot. I had that happen a couple of weeks ago. Actually, the Sunday that I was on here that I was really emotionally all jacked up, I had woken up in a very deep hole emotionally, and I was lucky enough to get a couple of trusted others on the phone to help walk me through how I was feeling, because I wasn't able to do it by myself, and I wasn't able to come up with any sort of rational place to be around it. So having those people in life are really, really important, and I feel really lucky that I have people like that in my life. And they're not a lot. I can count them on one hand, the people who I trust intrinsically to tell me what they really see, not sugarcoat anything, but not be harmful about it, not put it in my face, not try to make me wrong, but to just say, hey, look, this is what I'm hearing you say. Have you thought about looking at it like this? I know a little bit about the situation. What about that? That helps calm me down, and it helps me get perspective, which when I'm in any kind of agitated state, I don't tend to have a lot of perspective about things. And so even the things I think of to say are not helpful, which reminds me of another thing, right? Like, the more agitated I am, or the more triggered or in trauma or whatever I am, the fewer solutions I can see. All I can see is what is this one problem, and usually it's one harebrained, not helpful solution. I feel overwhelmed, I feel cornered, I feel like, oh my God, I can't work this out. If I can walk away, if I can take a nap, get a snack, talk to another friend, all of a sudden I see solutions to the situation I couldn't see before that may or may not have anything to do with the person I was in the altercation with. I just can't see the solution while I'm sitting in how bad I feel about it, or what kind of feelings came up for me about it. So sometimes, the pause, take a walk, sleep on it, all of that stuff sort of opens up my brain in a way that lets me see a solution that's like, oh, of course, that's what I can do. And it gets that person off the hook, and it solves the problem, and like everything can be all better. But it's tough to find that when I'm in the middle of feeling a bunch of feelings. Sometimes for me, it's a nexus of feelings. But it's tough to find that when I'm in the middle of feeling a bunch of feelings. Sometimes for me, it's a nexus of feelings. Ways that I have learned to try to overcome my overthinking, speaking out when I'm in the middle of feelings that keep me clouded about what really needs to say, what really does need to be seen. Yes. Not late for dinner. My mind says doom so much that when all I am is in doom and gloom, and everything's horrible, I can take that as the clue that I'm not where I need to be. I don't need to say anything right now, and I need to go, give myself a timeout and let myself calm back down, right? When all I can see is, oh my God, the sky is falling. There's nothing for me to figure out. There's just for me to let it pass, and that's it. So the hour's almost up. I thank you for being in this conversation with me today. We're changing